The heart monitor flatlined for 3 seconds before resuming its steady rhythm. Evangeline Ravencrest froze, her hands still gripping the washcloth she'd been using to clean Maximilian Sterling's chest. 2 years of the same routine, and his body had never reacted like this. She checked the 4-drip. Normal saline, vitamins, the usual cocktail keeping coma patients alive. Nothing different from yesterday or the 100 days before. Yet something had changed in room 847 of Pemberton Hospital's private wing. Still talking to Sleeping Beauty? Dr. Whitlock appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand. His voice carried that familiar mix of condescension and curiosity that made Evangeline's jaw tighten. His vitals spiked during the bath. 3rd time this week. Whitlock moved closer, studying the monitors with practiced efficiency. At 62, he'd overseen Maximilian's care since the accident, though his involvement always seemed more financial than medical. The Sterling family paid well for discretion. Probably just muscle memory. Bodies respond to touch even in deep coma states. He made a note. Continue the standard protocol. Mrs. Sterling wants him kept comfortable. Mrs. Sterling. Isadora had visited twice in 2 years, both times accompanied by her son Thaddeus. Neither visit lasted more than 10 minutes. Strange behavior for a stepmother supposedly devoted to her stepson's recovery. Evangeline resumed her work, running the warm cloth across Maximilian's shoulders. His skin held more color than most long-term patients. Muscle tone surprisingly maintained despite the extended unconsciousness. The Sterling family paid for premium care, including daily physical therapy and specialized nutrition. The accident report, she said without looking up. Was there ever a full investigation? Whitlock's pen stopped moving. Why would you ask that? Single vehicle crash on a clear night. No mechanical failure found. No alcohol in his system. Doesn't add up for someone with his driving record. Miss Ravencrest, your job is patient care, not detective work. His tone sharpened. The Sterling family has been through enough without hospital staff spreading conspiracy theories. She continued washing, moving down to Maximilian's arms. Strong forearms, calloused hands that suggested he worked with them despite his wealth. Another inconsistency in the official story of a pampered heir who'd simply lost control of his car. The heart monitor beeped again, faster now. Evangeline glanced at the display showing elevated pulse and blood pressure. She'd seen these patterns before in patients beginning to emerge from comas, though Maximilian's brain scans showed no significant change in activity. Dr. Whitlock, look at this. But he'd already left, disappearing down the corridor with unusual haste. Strange, considering he'd just lectured her about proper patient monitoring. Evangeline leaned closer, studying Maximilian's face for signs of consciousness. 2 years of one-sided conversations had made her an expert in reading his subtle expressions. The slight furrow in his brow suggested dreams, possibly nightmares. His lips sometimes moved soundlessly, as if trying to speak. She dipped the cloth in fresh water, wringing it carefully before placing it against his chest. The moment the fabric touched his skin, his eyes snapped open. Gray-blue irises stared directly at her, alert and focused in a way that sent shock through her system. This wasn't the gradual awakening doctors described in textbooks. This was immediate, complete consciousness. Who are you? His voice came out as a whisper, hoarse from disuse but unmistakably strong. Evangeline stepped back, nearly dropping the washcloth. I'm Evangeline, your nurse. You've been unconscious for 2 years. Maximilian tried to sit up, muscles straining against the weakness of prolonged bed rest. She moved quickly to support him, professional training overriding her shock. 2 years. He studied her face with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. What happened to me? Car accident. Your family said you were driving alone, lost control on Highway 87 near Bedford. Something flickered in his expression, a shadow of memory or recognition. He looked around the private room, taking in the expensive equipment and elegant furnishings that marked this as far from standard hospital care. My family. Are they here? I can call them. Your stepmother visits occasionally, and your cousin Thaddeus Dash. Stepmother. Maximilian's grip on her arm tightened. I don't have a stepmother. My father never remarried after my mother died. The words hit Evangeline like cold water. She'd met Isadora Sterling multiple times, had spoken with hospital administrators about the woman's authority over Maximilian's care. Legal documents confirmed her status as next of kin following her marriage to Harrison Sterling. Mr. Sterling, you might be confused. That's normal after Dash. I'm not confused. His eyes held hers with startling clarity. I remember my father's funeral 6 months before the accident. There was no wife, no stepmother. Who is this woman claiming to be my family? The heart monitor showed his pulse climbing dangerously high. Evangeline reached for the call button, but Maximilian caught her wrist. Don't. Not yet. His voice carried an urgency that stopped her cold. Something's wrong here. Very wrong. And I think you might be the only person I can trust. Maximilian's legs trembled as Evangeline helped him into the wheelchair. 2 years of muscle atrophy had taken their toll, though his recovery seemed remarkably swift for someone who'd been comatose so long. She'd seen patients take months to regain basic motor functions. The physical therapy team will want to assess you immediately, she said, adjusting the footrests. Your recovery is unprecedented. Tell me about this stepmother first. He gripped the armrests, knuckles white with tension. What does she look like? Evangeline hesitated. Hospital protocol demanded she notify the attending physician immediately when a coma patient regained consciousness. Yet something in Maximilian's demeanor convinced her to wait. Tall, blonde, maybe 50 years old. Well-dressed, expensive jewelry. She speaks with authority about your medical care and has power of attorney over your finances. Maximilian's jaw tightened. That could describe half the women in Manhattan's social circles. Did she ever mention how she met my father? No personal details. She always seemed more interested in your prognosis than visiting. Evangeline pushed the wheelchair toward the window. Actually, it struck me as odd. Most family members spend hours here, talking to coma patients, bringing personal items. She never stayed longer than necessary to sign paperwork. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the room as Maximilian stared out at the city skyline. His expression shifted between concentration and frustration, as if grasping for memories that remained just out of reach. I remember my father's funeral clearly. St. Patrick's Cathedral, September 15th. I gave the eulogy. His voice carried certainty. Harrison Sterling died alone, exactly as he lived after my mother passed. No wife, no romantic interests. He threw himself into work after losing her. Evangeline studied his profile. The conviction in his voice contradicted everything in his medical files. Either Maximilian suffered from significant memory distortion, or someone had constructed an elaborate deception around his unconscious form. A knock interrupted her thoughts. Dr. Whitlock entered with 2 people she recognized immediately. Isadora Sterling moved with practiced elegance, her designer heels clicking against the polished floor. Behind her, Thaddeus Blackwater carried himself with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to wealth and privilege. Maximilian. Isadora rushed forward, tears already forming in her perfectly made-up eyes. Thank God you're awake. We've been so worried. She moved to embrace him, but Maximilian raised his hand, stopping her cold. His expression remained neutral, though Evangeline noticed his pulse rate climbing on the monitor. I'm sorry, but I don't recognize you. His voice carried polite confusion. Dr. Whitlock mentioned you've been handling my medical care, but I'm having trouble placing how we know each other. Isadora's composure faltered for just a moment before recovering. Darling, it's me, Isadora. Your stepmother. Don't you remember? I married your father 3 years ago. My father died unmarried. Maximilian's tone remained steady. Perhaps you have me confused with someone else. Thaddeus stepped forward, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Cousin, you've been through trauma. Memory issues are common after extended unconsciousness. The doctors warned us about this possibility. Cousin. Maximilian studied the younger man's face. I don't recall having cousins. My father was an only child, as was my mother. The tension in the room thickened. Evangeline watched the interplay carefully, noting how both visitors seemed prepared for this conversation. Their responses felt rehearsed, as if they'd anticipated Maximilian's memory problems and planned accordingly. Dr. Whitlock cleared his throat. Memory consolidation issues are indeed common in cases like this. With time and proper treatment, most patients recover their full recollection of events. Most patients, Maximilian repeated slowly. What about medical records from before my accident? Surely there's documentation of family relationships, emergency contacts, that sort of thing. Hospital records confirm Mrs. Sterling's authority, Whitlock said quickly. She's been making medical decisions on your behalf since the accident. Based on what legal documentation? The question hung in the air. Evangeline found herself holding her breath, waiting for an answer that would either confirm or demolish the growing suspicion in her mind. Marriage certificate, obviously, Isadora said, though her voice lacked its earlier warmth. Along with your father's will naming me as your guardian in case of incapacitation. I'd like to see those documents. Of course, darling, but perhaps after you've had time to rest and recover. Dr. Whitlock says too much stress could impede your healing process. Maximilian's gaze shifted to Evangeline. What do you think, nurse? Should I avoid stress, or should I try to understand what happened to me? She felt all eyes in the room focus on her. Hospital politics demanded she defer to the attending physician and acknowledge the family's authority. Yet everything about this situation felt wrong. I think patients have the right to understand their medical situation and legal status, she said carefully. Transparency generally improves recovery outcomes. Dr. Whitlock's expression darkened. Miss Ravencrest, perhaps you could give the family some privacy. Actually, I'd prefer she stay. Maximilian's voice carried newfound authority. She's been caring for me for 2 years. I trust her judgment. The admission created an uncomfortable silence. Isadora's painted smile never wavered, but something cold flickered in her eyes as she looked at Evangeline. How thoughtful, she said. Though I'm sure the nursing staff has many other patients requiring attention. Not today, Evangeline replied. Mr. Sterling is my primary assignment. Thaddeus moved closer to the wheelchair. You know, cousin, there are some business matters we should discuss. The company has been in transition since your accident, and now that you're recovering, we'll need to address several urgent situations. What kind of business matters? Sterling Pharmaceuticals has some contracts requiring your signature. Time-sensitive deals that have been on hold awaiting your recovery. Maximilian's eyes narrowed. I don't recall being involved in any pharmaceutical business. My interests were in real estate development. Another silence. Another crack in their carefully constructed story. Memory issues, Dr. Whitlock said again, though his tone suggested he was trying to convince himself as much as anyone else. Evangeline watched Maximilian's face as fragments of suspicion crystallized into certainty. Whatever game these people were playing, he was beginning to see through it. The question was whether he'd have enough time to uncover the truth before they silenced him again. 3 days after his awakening, Maximilian could walk without assistance. The physical therapy team called it miraculous, though Evangeline suspected his rapid recovery had more to do with determination than medical intervention. He'd spent every waking hour pacing his room, testing his strength, preparing for something. The night shift records, he said, studying the clipboard she'd smuggled from the nurse's station. Look at the medication entries. Evangeline leaned closer, their shoulders touching as they examined the charts. The proximity sent an unexpected warmth through her chest, a feeling she'd been fighting since his awakening. Professional boundaries meant everything in her line of work, yet Maximilian Sterling seemed to obliterate every rule she'd lived by. Here, his finger traced a pattern in the dosage notations. Every Tuesday and Friday for the past 6 months, my 4 medications were increased by 30%. Always during Dr. Whitlock's shifts. She studied the entries, recognizing the subtle alterations in handwriting and timing. Those doses would keep you deeper under. Longer recovery time, more dependency on life support. Someone wanted to ensure I stayed unconscious. Maximilian set the clipboard aside and moved to the window. The question is, why keep me alive at all? If they wanted me dead, a car accident would have been sufficient. Evangeline had wondered the same thing. Most conspiracies involving wealthy heirs ended in obituaries, not extended medical care. Yet someone had invested considerable resources in maintaining Maximilian's life while keeping him incapacitated. Maybe they needed time to arrange something. Legal documents, business transfers. She paused, considering the implications. Or maybe they needed you alive to access certain accounts or properties. Sterling Pharmaceuticals never existed in my father's portfolio. I've been thinking about what Thaddeus mentioned, and I'm certain of it. Dad owned construction companies, real estate developments, some tech investments. Nothing in pharmaceuticals. A soft knock interrupted their conversation. Evangeline quickly hid the charts as Dr. Whitlock entered, followed by a woman she didn't recognize. Tall and severe, with graying hair pulled into a tight bun, The stranger carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Mr. Sterling, this is Dr. Margaret Henley from the Psychiatric Evaluation Team. Mrs. Sterling requested a mental health assessment given your memory difficulties." Maximilian's expression didn't change, though Evangeline noticed his hands tense. "I wasn't aware I'd consented to psychiatric evaluation. Your stepmother has medical power of attorney," Dr. Henley said, opening a leather portfolio. "She's concerned about your inability to recognize family members and your apparent confusion about business matters." "I'm not confused. I'm questioning inconsistencies in information being presented to me." Dr. Henley made a note. "Paranoid ideation is common in patients recovering from traumatic brain injury. We have medications that can help with that." The word medications seemed to hang in the air like a threat. Evangeline understood immediately what was happening. If they could establish Maximilian as mentally incompetent, Isadora's control over his affairs would become permanent. "I'd like to request a second opinion," Maximilian said calmly. "From a neurologist not affiliated with this hospital." "That's not necessary," Dr. Whitlock interjected quickly. "Dr. Henley is highly qualified, and we've been monitoring your condition throughout your recovery. Nevertheless, I'm entitled to seek outside consultation." Dr. Henley's pen moved across her notepad with deliberate strokes. Refusal to cooperate with medical professionals, insistence on seeking multiple opinions despite clear diagnoses. These behaviors suggest deeper psychological issues. Evangeline watched the trap closing around Maximilian and made a decision that would probably cost her job. Actually, Mr. Sterling's cognitive function appears completely normal. His memory of events prior to the accident is detailed and consistent. He's been coherent, logical, and appropriate in all our interactions. 3 pairs of eyes turned toward her with varying degrees of hostility. Dr. Henley's expression suggested she'd just committed professional suicide. "Miss Ravencrest, you're not qualified to make psychiatric assessments," Dr. Whitlock said. His tone carried a warning she chose to ignore. "But I am qualified to observe patient behavior and report accurately on mental status." Mr. Sterling shows no signs of confusion, agitation, or cognitive impairment. Dr. Henley closed her portfolio with a sharp snap. "I think we have enough information for an initial assessment. Mr. Sterling, I'll be recommending a 72-hour psychiatric hold for further evaluation." "On what grounds?" "Paranoid delusions regarding family members, refusal to acknowledge documented relationships, and resistance to appropriate medical care." Maximilian stood slowly, his full height giving him a commanding presence despite his recent weakness. "I want to speak with a lawyer before any psychiatric hold is implemented." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Dr. Whitlock said. "Medical emergencies take precedence over legal consultations. This isn't a medical emergency. This is a manufactured crisis designed to maintain someone else's control over my life and assets." The accusation landed like a physical blow. Dr. Henley and Dr. Whitlock exchanged glances that confirmed Maximilian's suspicions more clearly than any confession. "I think we should continue this discussion privately," Dr. Henley said, moving toward the door. "Miss Ravencrest, please prepare Mr. Sterling for transfer to the psychiatric wing." After they left, Evangeline moved quickly to the window. "There's a service elevator at the end of the hall. If you can make it that far, I can get you out of here." "You'd risk your career for someone you barely know?" She turned to face him, surprised by the intensity in his gray eyes. "Something about this whole situation stinks. Those medication records, the psychiatric evaluation, the way everyone responds when you ask questions. Either you're the most elaborate con artist I've ever met, or someone is trying very hard to keep you silenced. And you believe me?" The question hung between them, loaded with more weight than it should carry. Evangeline had built her career on professional detachment, on following protocols and deferring to authority. Yet everything about Maximilian Sterling challenged those instincts. "I believe you," she said simply. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes and smell the faint scent of soap from his morning shower. "Why?" "Because in 2 years of caring for you, I never saw any evidence of the life they're describing. No personal items from a stepmother, no business documents from a pharmaceutical company, no photos or letters from family. Just a man alone in an expensive room, kept alive but not really living." Something shifted in his expression, a vulnerability that made her breath catch. Before she could analyze the feeling, Footsteps echoed in the hallway. Heavy, purposeful steps accompanied by the rattle of medical equipment. "They're coming back," Maximilian said. "With sedatives, probably." Evangeline grabbed his hand without thinking. Service elevator. Now. They moved quickly through the corridor, her keycard providing access to restricted areas most patients never saw. Behind them, she could hear voices growing louder, more urgent. Discovery would mean more than job loss. It would mean complicity in whatever conspiracy surrounded Maximilian Sterling. As the elevator doors closed, she caught a glimpse of Dr. Whitlock rounding the corner, his face flushed with anger and something that looked remarkably like fear. Whatever secrets they were protecting, Maximilian's questions had struck dangerously close to the truth. The elevator descended toward the parking garage, carrying them away from the controlled environment where others had dictated every moment of Maximilian's existence. For the first time in 2 years, he was truly free. Whether either of them would survive that freedom remained to be seen. The Sterling estate in Westchester sat empty, its windows dark against the evening sky. Maximilian used his fingerprint to bypass the security system, muscle memory overriding 2 years of forced unconsciousness. The massive oak doors opened to reveal rooms covered in dust sheets, as if the house had been waiting for his return. "No one's lived here since the accident," he said, leading Evangeline through the marble foyer. "Another piece that doesn't fit. If Isadora was my stepmother, she would have inherited this place." Evangeline followed him up the curved staircase, noting the family portraits lining the walls. 3 generations of Sterling men stared down at them, but no images of Isadora appeared anywhere. Either she'd been meticulously erased from family history, or she'd never belonged there at all. "The safe is in my father's study," Maximilian said, pushing open heavy mahogany doors. If there are marriage documents, they'd be there. The study remained exactly as he remembered it. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, an antique desk that had belonged to his grandfather, and behind a first edition of Moby Dick, a wall safe that only 2 people had ever known how to open. Maximilian's fingers worked the combination automatically. The steel door swung open to reveal documents, jewelry, and a collection of leather-bound journals his father had kept for decades. He pulled everything out, spreading papers across the desk surface. "Birth certificates, property deeds, business contracts," he said, scanning each document. "Everything's here except any trace of a marriage to Isadora Sterling." Evangeline picked up one of the journals, opening to entries from 3 years earlier. Harrison Sterling's handwriting filled page after page with business notes, personal observations, and concerns about his son's future. No mention of romance, marriage, or any woman named Isadora. "Look at this," she said, pointing to an entry dated 6 months before Maximilian's accident. "Your father writes about meeting with lawyers to update his will. He specifically mentions leaving everything to his only heir and expresses concern about keeping the family legacy safe from opportunists." Maximilian read over her shoulder, his breath warm against her neck. The proximity sent heat through her body, a reminder that her feelings for him had grown far beyond professional concern. 2 years of one-sided conversation had created an intimacy she'd never acknowledged until now. "Opportunists," he repeated. He suspected someone might try to exploit his death. Evangeline turned another page, finding an entry that made her heart race. "Here, 2 weeks before your accident. He writes about receiving threatening phone calls and hiring additional security for the estate. Someone was pressuring him about business deals he refused to make." "What kind of deals?" She read aloud from Harrison Sterling's careful script. "Pharmaceutical patents, manufacturing rights, exclusive distribution agreements. Companies offering far below market value for assets I've never owned. Someone believes Sterling Industries has connections to drug development that simply don't exist." Maximilian pulled out his father's final will, dated 1 month before the accident. The document confirmed everything he'd remembered. Harrison Sterling left his entire estate to his son, with no mention of a wife or stepson. Detailed instructions specified that in case of Maximilian's incapacitation, control should pass to his longtime attorney, not family members. "So how did Isadora gain legal authority over my medical care?" he asked. Evangeline found the answer in a manila folder tucked behind the other documents. Inside were photocopies of legal papers she didn't recognize from the hospital files. A marriage certificate dated 2 years after Harrison's death, signed by officials who couldn't have witnessed a ceremony with a dead man. Power of attorney documents bearing Maximilian's signature, though the handwriting looked nothing like his natural script. Forgeries, she said, examining the paperwork. Sophisticated ones, but forgeries nonetheless. Maximilian studied the fake marriage certificate, his jaw tightening with anger. They waited until I was unconscious to create an entire fictional family history. But why? What do they really want? The answer came in the form of business cards scattered at the bottom of the safe. Sterling Industries, Harrison's legitimate company, but also cards for Sterling Pharmaceuticals, a business that had never existed during his father's lifetime. Someone had created a pharmaceutical company using the Sterling name and was using Maximilian's unconscious state to legitimize their claim to it. They're using your family name to build credibility for illegal operations, Evangeline said. Pharmaceutical fraud, maybe patent theft. Your father's reputation gives them access to deals and contracts they could never secure on their own. A sound from downstairs made them both freeze. Car doors slamming, footsteps on gravel, voices carrying through the night air. Someone had followed them to the estate. Maximilian quickly gathered the most important documents while Evangeline looked for alternate exits. The study had French doors leading to a balcony, but the drop to the garden below would be dangerous for someone still recovering from extended bed rest. There's a service staircase behind the kitchen, he said, stuffing papers into a leather briefcase. We can reach the garage without going through the main floor. They moved quickly through darkened hallways, guided by Maximilian's knowledge of his childhood home. Behind them, the front door opened with the electronic beep of someone using a security code. Whoever was pursuing them had legitimate access to the Sterling estate. This way, Maximilian whispered, leading her down a narrow staircase servants had once used to move between floors without disturbing the family. The passage emerged near the kitchen, where tall windows revealed car headlights sweeping across the circular driveway. 3 vehicles had arrived, too many for a simple search party. They reached the garage through a connecting door, finding Maximilian's car exactly where he'd left it 2 years earlier. The engine turned over smoothly, German engineering proving its reliability even after extended storage. As they pulled out of the garage, Evangeline caught a glimpse of the people entering the main house. Isadora Sterling led the group, accompanied by Thaddeus and several men in expensive suits. One figure remained in the shadows, but something about his posture suggested authority that went beyond family relationships. They're not just stealing your identity, she said as they drove toward the main road. They're running some kind of operation that requires your family name and your incapacitation. Maximilian navigated the winding country roads with practiced ease, muscle memory compensating for his recent unconsciousness. And now that I'm awake and asking questions, I've become a liability they need to eliminate. The realization hit Evangeline like cold water. The psychiatric hold hadn't been about control, it had been about permanent silencing. Once Maximilian was declared mentally incompetent, accidents could happen. Patients in psychiatric facilities sometimes harmed themselves, sometimes simply faded away under heavy medication. We need somewhere safe to go, she said. Somewhere they can't find us while we figure out how to expose this. I know a place. A cabin my father owned in the Adirondacks. Off the books, paid for with cash, no electronic records. He used it for hunting trips and private meetings. As they drove north through the darkness, Evangeline realized her life had fundamentally changed. She'd abandoned her career, her safety, and her carefully controlled existence to help a man she'd known for 3 days. Yet somehow, the choice felt inevitable. Maximilian reached across the console, his fingers intertwining with hers. The touch sent electricity through her system, a connection that went beyond gratitude or shared danger. Thank you, he said simply, for believing me when everyone else thought I was losing my mind. You're not losing your mind, she replied, squeezing his hand. But we might both lose our lives if we don't stay ahead of whatever this is. The mountain roads stretched before them, dark and uncertain. Behind them, the lights of civilization faded into memory. They were alone now, bound together by secrets that could destroy them both. In the distance, Evangeline thought she saw headlights following at a careful distance, matching their speed through the winding turns. Their escape from the Sterling estate might have been more visible than they'd hoped. The game of cat and mouse had begun in earnest. The cabin sat nestled among tall pines, its rustic exterior hiding modern security systems Harrison Sterling had installed years earlier. Maximilian disarmed the alarms with codes that came back to him like childhood memories, while Evangeline checked the windows for signs of surveillance. "No one's been here recently," he said, switching on minimal lighting. "But we should avoid using phones or internet connections. They'll be monitoring everything connected to the Sterling name." Evangeline spread the stolen documents across the kitchen table, organizing them by date and relevance. 3 hours of careful examination revealed a pattern more complex than simple identity theft. "Look at these pharmaceutical patent applications," she said, pointing to a series of forms dated over the past 18 months. Sterling Pharmaceuticals has been claiming ownership of drug formulas that belong to other companies. Maximilian studied the technical specifications, recognizing names and chemical compounds from his reading. These aren't just patent thefts. Someone's manufacturing counterfeit medications using stolen formulas. The implications hit them both simultaneously. Fake medications in the healthcare system could kill thousands of people. The scale of liability would destroy anyone connected to the operation, which explained why they needed Maximilian unconscious rather than dead. They needed a fall guy, Evangeline said. If the FDA or law enforcement discovered the counterfeiting operation, they could blame everything on the Sterling family legacy. Your unconscious state gives them plausible deniability while they profit from the crimes. A sound outside made them both freeze. Footsteps on gravel, careful and deliberate. Someone was approaching the cabin with professional stealth. Maximilian moved to the window, peering through a gap in the curtains. 3 figures advanced through the trees, their movements coordinated like military personnel. These weren't the well-dressed criminals from the estate. These were professionals sent to handle a problem permanently. "Back door," he whispered, grabbing the briefcase of documents. "There's a trail that leads to the lake. We can lose them in the woods." They slipped out through the kitchen entrance, moving silently across the pine needle floor. Behind them, Evangeline heard the front door being forced open with practiced efficiency. No shouting, no commands. Just the quiet sounds of people who'd done this many times before. The trail wound downward through dense forest, moonlight filtering through branches to create a patchwork of shadows and silver light. Maximilian moved with surprising agility for someone recently comatose, adrenaline and muscle memory overriding physical limitations. At the lake's edge, an old fishing boat bobbed gently against a weathered dock. Maximilian helped Evangeline into the craft before pushing off into dark water. The electric motor hummed quietly, carrying them across the lake toward lights visible on the far shore. "There's a resort over there," he said, steering toward the distant glow. "We can call for help once we're around other people." Behind them, flashlight beams swept across the cabin's interior, then moved outside to search the surrounding area. Their pursuers had discovered the escape route quickly, professional hunters tracking professional prey. Halfway across the lake, Evangeline's phone buzzed with an incoming text. She almost ignored it, then realized the message might provide important information about their situation. The text came from an unknown number. "Miss Ravencrest, you're making a serious mistake. Mr. Sterling is not who you think he is. Meet me at Pemberton Hospital tomorrow morning, and I'll explain everything. Dr. Whitlock." She showed the message to Maximilian, watching his expression harden in the moonlight. "They're trying to separate us," he said. "Convince you that I'm the real criminal in this situation. Why would they bother? They could have killed us both at the cabin. Because you're not supposed to be involved in this. You're an innocent bystander who got caught up in something bigger. They probably want to offer you a deal. Stay quiet about what you've seen, and nothing happens to you." The boat reached the far shore, where a small marina served the lake resort. Lights from the main lodge promised safety and witnesses, people who couldn't be easily silenced or intimidated. Maximilian tied off the boat, while Evangeline checked for pursuit. The lake remained dark and quiet, no signs of immediate danger. Their hunters had either lost the trail or were planning a different approach. "We need to contact the authorities," she said as they walked toward the lodge. "The FBI, someone outside the local system who can't be bought or threatened. First, we need more evidence. What we have proves forgery and identity theft, but not the pharmaceutical counterfeiting. Without that connection, they can claim everything was a mistake, pay some fines, and disappear. The lodge's main lobby buzzed with late-night activity. Guests coming back from dinner, staff preparing for the morning shift, enough people to make violence difficult. Maximilian approached the front desk with confidence that suggested he'd done this before. "I need to use your business center," he told the clerk. "Internet access and a secure phone line. I'll pay cash." 20 minutes later, they sat in a small office behind the main desk, surrounded by evidence spread across every available surface. Maximilian had contacted a private investigator he'd used for business matters, someone whose loyalty couldn't be purchased by his enemies. "Jack Morrison," he said, ending the call. "Former FBI, now private security. He's driving up from Albany tonight. Should be here by dawn." Evangeline studied the pharmaceutical documents again, looking for patterns they might have missed. These counterfeit medications, where are they being distributed? Hospitals, pharmacies, direct sales? According to these shipping records, primarily to rural hospitals and small medical practices, places that might not have sophisticated testing equipment to detect fakes. The strategy was diabolical in its simplicity. Rural healthcare facilities often struggled with budgets and supply chains. Slightly cheaper medications from a company with the sterling name would seem like legitimate business opportunities rather than criminal fraud. "They're targeting vulnerable populations," Evangeline said, anger building in her chest. "People who can't afford better healthcare, who trust their local doctors and hospitals to provide safe medications." Maximilian's phone rang, interrupting their analysis. He checked the caller ID, then answered with visible tension. "Hello, Thaddeus." Even from across the small office, Evangeline could hear the smooth voice on the other end of the call. "Cousin, you're making this much more difficult than necessary. We know where you are, and we know Miss Ravencrest is with you. There's no need for anyone to get hurt." "Hurt like my father was hurt? Or hurt like I was supposed to be hurt in that car accident?" A pause. Then Thaddeus continued with the same calm tone. "Your father's death was natural causes. Heart attack, remember? And your accident was just that. An accident. You're letting paranoia cloud your judgment." Then explain the forged marriage certificate. Explain Sterling Pharmaceuticals. Explain why you needed me unconscious for 2 years. Another pause, longer this time. When Thaddeus spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, less smooth and more threatening. "You have 48 hours to return the documents you stole and submit to psychiatric evaluation. After that, Miss Ravencrest's safety can't be guaranteed." The line went dead. Maximilian stared at the phone, processing the implications of the threat. "They're not just running a counterfeiting operation," he said slowly. "They've killed before, and they'll kill again to protect it." Evangeline felt ice form in her stomach. She'd thought they were dealing with white-collar criminals, people who used lawyers and accountants as weapons. The reality was much darker. "Your father," she said. "The heart attack. You don't think it was natural, do you?" Maximilian's expression confirmed her suspicion. Dad was 62, perfect health, no family history of heart problems. He exercised daily, ate well, had regular medical checkups. People like that don't just drop dead from heart attacks. Unless someone induces the heart attack. The words hung between them like a death sentence. If Thaddeus and Isadora had murdered Harrison Sterling to gain access to the family name and resources, Maximilian's continued existence posed an intolerable threat to their operation. Outside the lodge windows, dawn was beginning to break over the mountains. Beautiful country, peaceful and remote. The kind of place where people could disappear without anyone asking too many questions. Evangeline realized they had perhaps hours before their hunters found them again. This time, there might not be another escape route available. "Jack Morrison better get here soon," she said, checking the locks on the office door. Maximilian moved to the window, scanning the parking lot for suspicious vehicles. "He will. And when he does, we're going to end this thing before anyone else gets hurt." The promise sounded confident, but Evangeline noticed his hands shaking slightly as he spoke. Even someone as strong as Maximilian Sterling had limits, and they were rapidly approaching his. Jack Morrison arrived at the lodge just after sunrise, his weathered face and careful eyes marking him as someone who'd seen too much violence in his career. Former FBI, now private investigator, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man comfortable with danger. "Christ, Max, you look like hell," he said, embracing Maximilian in the lodge lobby. 2 years in a coma, and then this mess. Your father would be spinning in his grave. Evangeline watched the reunion from across the room, noting how Maximilian's posture relaxed for the first time since his awakening. Here was someone he trusted completely, an ally in a world that seemed determined to destroy him. Jack, this is Evangeline Ravencrest, the nurse who saved my life. Evangeline, Jack Morrison, the best private investigator on the East Coast. Morrison studied her with professional assessment. Miss Ravencrest, you've put yourself in considerable danger helping Max. These people don't leave witnesses. I figured that out last night when they sent armed professionals to a remote cabin, she replied. What I want to know is who we're really dealing with. Morrison opened a thick folder he'd brought from Albany. Inside were photographs, financial records, and surveillance reports that painted a disturbing picture of the conspiracy surrounding Maximilian's life. Isadora Sterling isn't her real name, Morrison began. She's actually Isadora Volkov, former pharmaceutical researcher fired from 3 different companies for falsifying drug trials. Her specialty was manipulating clinical data to make dangerous medications appear safe. The photographs showed a younger Isadora in laboratory settings, her face harder and more focused than the elegant socialite who'd claimed to be Maximilian's stepmother. Criminal records from Eastern Europe revealed a pattern of fraud and corruption spanning 2 decades. Thaddeus Blackwater is Marcus Volkov, her younger brother. No relation to the Sterling family, despite the forged adoption papers. He's got convictions for securities fraud and money laundering in 4 different countries. Maximilian studied the intelligence reports with growing anger. So they're international criminals who decided to steal my family's identity for their latest scheme. It gets worse, Morrison continued. The pharmaceutical counterfeiting operation is just the beginning. They've been using Sterling Industries as a front for drug trafficking, arms dealing, and human trafficking. Your unconscious state gave them 2 years to build a criminal empire using your father's reputation. Evangeline felt sick as the full scope of the crimes became clear. People had died because of medications these criminals had manufactured and distributed. Families had been destroyed by their trafficking operations. The Sterling name had become synonymous with international crime. How did they know about my father's death before it was announced? Maximilian asked. They moved too quickly after the funeral for this to be opportunistic. Morrison's expression darkened. Because they caused his death. We found traces of a rare cardiac toxin in tissue samples from his autopsy. Someone with pharmaceutical knowledge used an untraceable poison to trigger his heart attack. The confirmation hit Maximilian like a physical blow. His father had been murdered by people who then spent 2 years using his son's unconscious body to legitimize their crimes. The violation went beyond simple theft. It was a desecration of everything the Sterling family had built. Dr. Whitlock was part of it from the beginning, Morrison continued. They needed someone inside the hospital to maintain your coma and manipulate your medical records. He's been receiving payments from offshore accounts controlled by the Volkovs. Evangeline thought about the medication adjustments she'd discovered, the increased dosages that kept Maximilian deeper under sedation. Whitlock hadn't just been a corrupt doctor. He'd been an active participant in attempted murder. We have enough evidence to bring down the entire operation, Morrison said. But we need to move quickly. My sources say they're planning to eliminate both of you within the next 24 hours. Before anyone could respond, the lodge's fire alarm began screaming. Emergency lights flashed in the corridors as guests emerged from their rooms in confusion and panic. Through the main windows, Evangeline could see smoke rising from the parking lot. They found us, Maximilian said, grabbing the briefcase of documents. Jack, is there another way out? Morrison was already moving toward the service entrance. Kitchen loading dock. My car's parked behind the building. They fought through crowds of evacuating guests, the acrid smell of burning gasoline filling the air. Someone had torched the parking lot to create chaos and force everyone outside where they could be easily targeted. As they reached the kitchen, gunshots echoed from the main lobby. Professional killers had arrived under cover of the emergency, using the confusion to eliminate their targets without witnesses. Morrison kicked open the loading dock door, revealing his armored SUV parked 20 yards away. Between them and safety, 3 armed men in tactical gear swept the area with military precision. Stay low, Morrison whispered, drawing a pistol from his shoulder holster. When I say run, head straight for the vehicle. Don't stop for anything. The first exchange of gunfire shattered the morning calm. Morrison's shots drove the attackers behind cover, while Maximilian and Evangeline sprinted toward the SUV. Behind them, the lodge erupted in screams as innocent guests found themselves caught in a professional assassination attempt. Evangeline felt bullets whistle past her head as she dove behind the vehicle. Maximilian pulled her down beside him, his body shielding her from the continuing gunfire. The proximity sent heat through her chest despite the terror of their situation. Engines armored, Morrison called out, firing controlled bursts at their attackers. Get in and stay down. They piled into the SUV as Morrison laid down covering fire. The vehicle's engine roared to life just as reinforcements arrived from the tree line. More professionals, more weapons, more evidence that the Volkovs commanded resources far beyond simple pharmaceutical fraud. Morrison gunned the engine, the armored vehicle smashing through a wooden fence as bullets sparked off its reinforced panels. In the rear window, Evangeline watched the lodge recede into smoke and chaos, another crime scene in the Volkovs' wake of destruction. Where are we going? Maximilian asked, checking Evangeline for injuries. Albany FBI field office. I've got contacts there who can't be bought. Morrison navigated mountain roads with professional skill. We'll turn over everything we have and let the federal prosecutors handle it from there. Will that be enough to stop them? It better be, because after this morning, there's no going back. They'll keep coming until we're all dead or they're in federal prison. Evangeline leaned against Maximilian's shoulder, exhaustion and adrenaline making her hands shake. In 3 days, her quiet life as a hospital nurse had become a nightmare of international crime and professional killers. Yet she couldn't bring herself to regret the choices that had led her here. The people at the lodge, she said. Innocent guests who got caught up in this. Are they going to be okay? Morrison's expression suggested he'd seen too many innocent casualties in his career. Some will be fine. Others won't. That's the price of exposing people like the Volkovs. They don't distinguish between targets and bystanders. The weight of responsibility settled on Evangeline's shoulders. People had been hurt because she'd chosen to help Maximilian uncover the truth. The knowledge that exposure of the counterfeiting operation would save thousands of lives provided cold comfort against the immediate casualties. As they drove toward Albany, Maximilian's hand found hers in the space between seats. His fingers intertwined with hers, a connection that went beyond shared danger or mutual dependence. Despite everything that had happened, something real had grown between them. When this is over, he said quietly, I want to take you somewhere safe. Somewhere we can figure out what comes next. Evangeline squeezed his hand, surprised by the intensity of her feelings for someone she'd known such a short time. What if there is no what comes next? What if they succeed in stopping us? They won't, Maximilian replied with conviction that belied their circumstances. Too many people know the truth now. Too much evidence exists. The Volkovs made the mistake of letting their crimes get too big to contain. Morrison's phone buzzed with incoming messages. He glanced at the display, his expression growing more concerned with each notification. Problem, he announced. FBI Albany is compromised. Someone tipped them off that we're coming. There's a reception committee waiting for us that definitely isn't interested in our evidence. The realization that even federal law enforcement had been infiltrated sent despair through Evangeline's chest. If they couldn't trust the FBI, who could they turn to for help? New plan, Morrison said, taking an exit that led away from Albany. I know someone in the U.S. Attorney's office who's clean, but we'll have to get to Manhattan to reach her, and that means driving through territory the Volkovs control. The next few hours would determine whether justice prevailed or whether the truth died with them on a lonely highway. Evangeline closed her eyes and tried to prepare for whatever came next, drawing strength from Maximilian's presence beside her. In the distance, storm clouds gathered over the Hudson Valley, promising a fitting backdrop for the final confrontation that awaited them in the city. The abandoned Sterling Pharmaceuticals facility in Queens looked nothing like the legitimate business it pretended to be. Broken windows, rusted equipment, and overgrown weeds marked it as another shell company in the Volkov empire. But according to Morrison's intelligence, this was where they manufactured the counterfeit medications that had poisoned hundreds of patients across the Northeast. The main laboratory is in the basement, Morrison said, studying blueprints on his tablet. If we can get samples of their manufacturing process and document the operation, we'll have enough evidence to convince even corrupt federal agents. Evangeline checked her phone for the dozenth time since they'd arrived in Queens. No messages from the hospital, no calls from colleagues wondering where she'd disappeared. Her old life had simply ceased to exist the moment she'd chosen to help Maximilian escape. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chun is expecting us in 2 hours, Morrison continued. She's clean, ambitious, and looking for a case that will make her career. International pharmaceutical fraud with murder charges should do the trick. Maximilian studied the facility through binoculars, noting security cameras and motion sensors that suggested the building wasn't as abandoned as it appeared. They've got surveillance. Professional grade, not the kind of equipment you'd find in a vacant warehouse. Which means they're still using this place for something important, Morrison concluded. Maybe we'll get lucky and catch them in the act. They approached the building through a maze of abandoned shipping containers, using the industrial debris as cover from electronic surveillance. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, turning the concrete and metal into a furnace that sapped their energy with each step. At the building's rear entrance, Morrison made quick work of the electronic lock while Evangeline kept watch for security patrols. The door opened onto a corridor that smelled of chemicals and decay, fluorescent lights flickering sporadically to create an atmosphere of institutional neglect. Elevator shaft. Maximilian pointed to steel doors marked with radiation warnings. They're trying to scare people away from the basement levels. The descent into the facility's underground sections revealed the true scope of the Volkov operation. State-of-the-art pharmaceutical equipment filled rooms that should have contained only empty storage space. Chemical vats, packaging machines, and quality control stations operated with industrial efficiency. Jesus Christ, Morrison whispered, documenting everything with a high-resolution camera. They're not just counterfeiting existing medications. They're manufacturing completely new drugs without any testing or safety protocols. Evangeline examined labels on chemical containers, recognizing compounds that required special handling and disposal procedures. Some of these chemicals are banned in the United States. The carcinogenic potential alone could kill thousands of people. Computer terminals throughout the laboratory displayed shipping schedules and distribution networks that spanned multiple continents. The Volkovs weren't just targeting rural American hospitals. They were poisoning healthcare systems around the world. Download everything, Maximilian said, inserting a flash drive into the main server. Financial records, shipping manifests, chemical formulas, communication logs. We need documentation that proves intent and scope. While the computers transferred terabytes of incriminating data, Evangeline collected physical samples of the counterfeit medications. Each bottle represented lives destroyed by criminal greed, families torn apart by medical complications that should never have occurred. The sound of footsteps in the corridor above made them all freeze. Heavy boots, multiple people, moving with purpose rather than casual patrol patterns. Someone had discovered their intrusion. How much longer? Morrison asked, positioning himself near the stairwell with his weapon drawn. 2 minutes, Maximilian replied, monitoring the download progress. Maybe 3. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by voices speaking in accented English. Russian, Evangeline realized. The Volkov siblings had arrived personally to handle the security breach. We need to get out of here, she said, but Maximilian shook his head. Not without this data. Too many people have died for us to leave empty-handed. The basement lights suddenly blazed to full brightness as someone activated the main electrical system. Emergency exits sealed with electronic locks, trapping them in the underground laboratory. Professional planning, designed to contain intruders until cleanup crews could dispose of the evidence. Max, we need to go now, Morrison urged, but it was already too late. Isadora Volkov descended the stairs with theatrical elegance, her designer heels clicking against metal steps. Behind her, Thaddeus and 4 armed men spread out to cover all potential escape routes. The family resemblance between the siblings was obvious now that their false identities had been stripped away. Mr. Sterling, Isadora said, her voice carrying a slight Eastern European accent she'd hidden during her hospital visits. You've caused us considerable inconvenience. Not as much inconvenience as you caused my father when you murdered him, Maximilian replied, stepping protectively in front of Evangeline. Harrison Sterling was a stubborn old man who refused to see the potential in our business partnership. His death was regrettable but necessary. Isadora moved closer, studying them with predatory interest. Your death, however, will be purely practical. Thaddeus emerged from behind the pharmaceutical equipment, his boyish features transformed by cold calculation. The nurse is the real problem, sister. She knows too much about hospital procedures, medication protocols. She could identify our people in other facilities. Then she dies with the others. Isadora's tone suggested she was discussing dinner plans rather than multiple murders. Dr. Whitlock, please prepare the injection. From behind a bank of computers, Dr. Whitlock appeared carrying a medical bag and syringe. His hands shook as he drew liquid from a small vial, clearly uncomfortable with the transition from corrupt physician to active killer. Potassium chloride, he said, his voice barely audible. It will appear to be heart failure. Very difficult to detect in autopsy. Evangeline felt terror and rage compete for control of her emotions. These people had turned healing into murder, perverted medicine into a weapon of mass destruction. The syringe in Whitlock's hands represented everything she'd spent her career fighting against. You won't get away with this, she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. Too many people know the truth now. Actually, very few people know anything useful, Thaddeus replied. Morrison's FBI contacts believe he's gone rogue. The hospital thinks you suffered a nervous breakdown and disappeared with a patient. When your bodies are found, it will appear to be a murder-suicide committed by a mentally unstable nurse and her delusional patient. The psychological manipulation was as sophisticated as their pharmaceutical crimes. They'd spent months establishing false narratives to explain away any inconvenient deaths, corrupting institutions and individuals to support their version of events. Morrison moved slightly, trying to improve his tactical position without alerting the armed guards. Professional soldier recognizing a hopeless situation but refusing to surrender without a fight. The download is complete, Maximilian announced, palming the flash drive as he stepped away from the computer terminal. Irrelevant, Isadora said. Digital evidence can be destroyed, witnesses can be silenced, investigations can be misdirected. We've built this operation to survive occasional exposure. But you haven't built it to survive federal prosecution with solid evidence and cooperative witnesses, a new voice said from the stairwell. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Chun descended into the laboratory accompanied by a dozen federal agents in tactical gear. Her petite frame and professional demeanor contrasted sharply with the military precision of her escort team. Mrs. Volkov, Mr. Volkov, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, pharmaceutical fraud, and about 30 other felonies I'll be adding as we investigate your operation. The Volkov guards hesitated, outnumbered and outgunned by federal agents who'd clearly been planning this raid for some time. Morrison's contact had apparently been more trustworthy than anyone had dared hope. You have no authority here, Isadora protested, her composure finally cracking. We have diplomatic immunity, legitimate business operations, legal protection from prosecution. You had protection, Chin corrected, until about 6 hours ago, when several of your associates decided cooperation was preferable to life imprisonment. Amazing how quickly criminal loyalty evaporates when federal prosecutors start offering reduced sentences. Dr. Whitlock dropped the syringe, his hands raised in surrender before anyone ordered him to comply. His medical training apparently included enough legal knowledge to recognize when cooperation became the only viable option. As federal agents secured the crime scene and arrested the conspirators, Evangeline found herself leaning against Maximilian for support. Exhaustion, relief, and residual terror combined to make her legs unsteady. Is it over? She asked, watching Isadora and Thaddeus being led away in handcuffs. The arrests are over, Chun replied, approaching them with evident satisfaction. The prosecutions will take months, maybe years. But yes, the immediate danger to your lives is finished. Maximilian wrapped his arms around Evangeline, pulling her close in a gesture that went far beyond simple comfort. The warmth of his body against hers felt like coming home after a long and dangerous journey. What happens now? Evangeline asked, looking up into his gray eyes. Now we rebuild, Maximilian said softly. Sterling Industries, our lives, everything they destroyed. But this time, we do it together. The promise carried weight that had nothing to do with business or revenge. Something real had grown between them during their shared ordeal, a connection forged by trust and tested by mortal danger. As federal agents continued processing the crime scene, Evangeline allowed herself to believe that survival was possible, that justice could prevail, and that love might bloom even in the aftermath of such darkness. 6 months later, she would stand beside Maximilian in a courtroom as the Volkovs received multiple life sentences. The pharmaceutical counterfeiting operation would be dismantled, its victims compensated, and new safeguards implemented to prevent similar crimes. But for now, in the basement laboratory where evil had finally been exposed, it was enough to be alive, to be safe, and to be together. The worst was over. The best was yet to come. 6 months after the arrests, Maximilian stood in the ruins of the Volkov laboratory, now transformed into a construction site. Steel beams rose toward the sky where the Sterling Medical Institute would soon stand, a monument to ethical healthcare built from the ashes of corruption. The Pharmaceutical Safety Division will occupy the entire 3rd floor, Evangeline said, reviewing blueprints spread across a makeshift table. As Director of Patient Safety, she'd spent months designing protocols to prevent another Volkov-style conspiracy. Independent testing, direct FDA reporting, complete transparency. Maximilian watched her work with the same intensity he'd once reserved for business deals. 6 months of shared rebuilding had deepened their connection beyond the crisis that brought them together. She'd become his partner in every sense, the woman who'd saved not just his life, but his purpose. "The memorial wall goes here," he said, pointing to the main lobby plans. "Every victim of counterfeit medications, their names permanently honored." The victim count had climbed to 437 as investigators uncovered the full scope of the Volkov operation. Each name represented a family destroyed by pharmaceutical fraud, lives cut short by criminal greed disguised as medicine. Jack Morrison approached carrying coffee and grim satisfaction. Final sentencing came through this morning. Isadora got life without parole, Thaddeus got life plus 50 years, Whitlock got 25 with possibility of parole. The European associates are looking at similar terms. Justice felt inadequate against such massive loss of life, but it was something. The Volkovs would die in federal prison, their stolen wealth redistributed to victim families and medical research funding. "Any word on the Swiss accounts?" Evangeline asked. "Seized and frozen. $43 million going directly to victim compensation. Every family will receive full medical coverage and financial support." As the sun set over the construction site, Maximilian led Evangeline to a quiet corner where they could watch the city skyline emerge in evening light. The view encompassed everything they'd fought to protect. Hospitals where real healing happened, families unaware of the pharmaceutical safety protocols now safeguarding their medications. "I found something yesterday," he said, pulling a manila folder from his briefcase. Hospital records from 25 years ago. Evangeline opened the folder with curiosity that quickly became shock. Inside were medical documents detailing an emergency surgery on Harrison Sterling, saved by a blood transfusion from volunteer donor Helena Ravencrest, RN. Her mother had saved Maximilian's father's life. She contracted hepatitis from a contaminated needle during the donation, Maximilian said quietly. Died 3 months later from complications. "Your mother's sacrifice gave my father 25 more years of life." The revelation hit Evangeline like lightning. Her mother, who died when she was barely old enough to remember, had been directly connected to the Sterling family. The woman who'd taught her to value healing above personal safety had unknowingly saved the life of the man whose son she would later love. "Heroes rarely talk about their heroism," Maximilian continued. "But their children often continue their work without realizing it." Tears blurred Evangeline's vision as the cosmic significance of their connection became clear. This wasn't coincidence or random chance. 2 families bound by sacrifice and healing had found each other again across decades of separation. "I love you," Maximilian said, his voice carrying certainty earned through shared danger and mutual trust. "Not just for saving my life, but for giving me a purpose beyond revenge. For showing me that some things are worth risking everything to protect." "I love you too," she replied, meaning it with an intensity that surprised her. For helping me understand that my mother's legacy continues through every life we save. He reached into his jacket pocket, withdrawing a velvet box that made her heart skip several beats. The engagement ring inside caught the last rays of sunlight, a perfect diamond surrounded by smaller stones that sparkled like captured stars. Evangeline Ravencrest, will you marry me? Will you help me build something beautiful from all this destruction? Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, absolutely yes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Evangeline felt the weight of their shared future settling around them like a blessing. They would marry in the Institute's main lobby when construction finished, surrounded by the medical professionals who'd become their chosen family. The Sterling Medical Institute, she said, admiring the ring as it caught the city lights. A place where pharmaceutical safety comes before profit, where patients matter more than stock prices. Where healing is sacred again, Maximilian agreed. Where your mother's sacrifice and my father's vision combine to create something neither could have achieved alone. Above them, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The construction site would soon become a beacon of ethical healthcare, a testament to the possibility that love could triumph over greed, that justice could emerge from corruption. A year later, they would stand in the completed institute's lobby, exchanging vows before colleagues who'd witnessed their transformation from patient and nurse to partners in healing. Their children would grow up understanding that some things were worth fighting for, that individual courage could change the world. But for now, on a construction site where evil had been replaced by hope, it was enough to be engaged, to be alive, and to know they'd turned tragedy into triumph. The Sterling name would be associated with honor again. The Ravencrest legacy of healing would continue through another generation. Their story had begun with an awakening in a hospital room. It would continue with a lifetime of protecting others, building ethical healthcare systems, and loving each other with the intensity of people who'd faced death together and chosen life. Forever theirs, forever healing, forever love that would last beyond their own lifetimes, touching countless lives they would never meet but would always protect. In the distance, Manhattan's lights sparkled like earthbound constellations, a reminder that even in the largest cities, individual acts of courage and love could illuminate the darkness. They had learned that lesson through fire, and they would spend the rest of their lives teaching it to others.